In a way, this presentation is about talents you never see. We are talking today about equity gaps, and let me share my screen with you. My presentation is entitled Too Many Gaps, How Talent Seeps Away and What We Can Do About It. We are a wonderful research group of researchers from Taiwan, the National Taiwan Normal University, and from Germany, the Friedrich Alexander University, Erlangen-Nuremberg. I wanted to introduce my colleagues. In part, they are here. So I apologize again by the Taiwanese colleagues. My pronunciation of their name is terrible. So the first colleague is Senpen Yu, Michaela Gläser-Zikuda from Germany, Bettina Harter from Germany, Jingqi Kuo from Taiwan, Xiaoping Yu from Taiwan, and myself. So our topic is inequality, and it is also a topic in many fields. Multiple disparities have been identified, such as socio-economic achievement gaps, gender payment gap, racial and ethnic gaps, and of course, what is important for our field, excellence gaps. And they are defined as the difference in rates of advanced achievement. So this makes the difference to the other gaps, advanced achievement between various groups of students, and are supposed to exist in all areas of student activity. Examples include gender, race, twice exceptional students, socio-economic status. I give now some examples, and I hint already a little bit how complex the explanations of these gaps are. So look, for example, at these two girls from America, Emma and Olivia. Let's assume both girls have the same talents, exact the same talents. And the only difference between the girls are, here now are some examples of what Emma's parents can afford, but not Olivia's parents. They can send their daughter to a summer school. They can afford learning software. They can send her to an expensive private school, and so on. We would think, all else being equal between the two girls, including the talents of the two girls, we would expect for Emma a much better talent development. And you find such economic gaps around the globe, not only on the individual level, we can go at any scale level. For example, here is country level, and you see the world map of scientific Nobel Prizes by country, and you see also here that the richer countries, North America, European countries, Australia, they are overrepresented in such a map. So we have here a gap between rich people in a way, rich countries in a way, and poorer people, poorer countries in a way. Probably the same talents, but one can use the talent and develop the talents, the others not. Let's look at another gap which was frequently addressed in the research literature, race. Look here at Runako and Oliver. Of course, when it comes to race, you find also some economic differences, but let's focus here only on cultural differences. Let's assume again, both boys have exactly the same talents, and the only differences are here some examples of Oliver's social, cultural milieu and what Runako does not experience. Parents have an academic background, an ambition for Oliver an academic career. Oliver's parents talk frequently with him about school and want Oliver among the best at school. Oliver's friends like learning. Oliver's teachers are highly motivated. So these are typical differences, but not limited to these differences between different races. Again, probably the same talents, but these differences make a big difference when it comes to talent development. Look here at twice exceptional students. We have here two girls, Ella and Julia, and there are some differences in their attentional learning capital. For example, Julia has problems to focus during learning. Her effective learning time is only 32%. Ella's learning time is almost 50%. So let's say after 1 year, after 12 months of learning by Julia, Ella has, in a way, learned 18 months long. When she feels distracted during learning, probability increases that she starts playing combat computer games. So again, if everything is the same, including the talent, such a deficit, here an attentional deficit, may make all the difference in talent development between the two girls. Or look here at social variables. Again, the other explanations we already discussed, like economic, cultural, or here organismic differences, might also play a role between the two here. Now let's focus on the math careers, mathematics careers. We assume again they have the same talents for mathematics, but what are the differences? Here, examples of Peter's social environment regarding math. In his families are all academics, not in Charlotte's. Peter has a personal mentor, a retired math teacher, and he is a member of the math club at his school. This is very typical when it comes to gender differences in mathematics. They have much more social support, the boys, than the girls. But we assumed here there is no difference in talent, so all the differences would be due here at least to social educational capital differences. So excellence gaps and many other identified gaps share at least three common features. They point to disparities between groups like race, gender, socioeconomic class, twice exceptional versus no, versus average students. They violate our notions of equity and therefore require social, cultural, economic, pedagogical efforts to close them. And our contribution and our roundtable focuses on equity gaps in pedagogy, in particular in gifted education, what you call in the Netherlands honors education, and differences in talent development. It's of course true, each of these gaps has its own history, leads to individual personal experiences of those affected, which are unique and requires specific measures to close them. But we are researchers, and from a pedagogical point of view, the question arises as to whether these are conceptually completely different phenomena when we are talking about gender gaps, race gaps, and so on, or whether there are also gap commonalities that make it possible to develop more general pedagogical strategies and measures. In a way, my question here is reflected in two book titles. One book title is The Achievement Gap in Education, and the other one is Understanding and Closing Achievement Gaps, plural. So what are we talking about? Are they really different gaps, or do they share something? We think three gaps play a special role, and they are common to all these other gaps. We argue from an educational perspective that, taken together, they can provide a conceptual key to better understanding of and bridging between the other gaps. These are achievement gaps, learning gaps, and opportunity gaps. What is meant by that? Achievement gaps refer to the output of educational processes. For example, participation rates, learning outcomes, achievements, rewards. We can, for example, ask how many females are among the mathematics professors at Western universities. Another type of gap are opportunity gaps. They refer to the input of educational processes. for example, the resources, opportunities, access to infrastructures, learning opportunities. And when you remember, for example, the boy who has a functional mathematics environment, but not the boy, so you can imagine that there are also not only achievement gaps in terms of output, but also in terms of input or opportunity gaps. But there's a third important gap in our view. Learning gaps refer to individual capacities to take advantage of opportunities, resources, access to infrastructures and learning opportunities. So even if there is a difference in opportunities, it doesn't mean you can really use these resources. We also have to take a look at the specific capabilities of the individuals to make use of resources and so on, and which might lead to different outcomes. So when we talk about these equity gaps, we have some challenges, and we want to point to two at least here. One challenge is an intersectional challenge. Individuals can be disadvantaged across multiple gaps by possessing multiple characteristics. One example, a famous example, these are results of a mathematics test. And we are tapping now into two stereotypes. One stereotype is gender. You see here results for males and for females. And when you see the results for males, they are in all categories here, in all fields, higher than the corresponding results and achievements of the females in mathematics. And we have ethnicity, Asian Americans and Latinos. And there is the stereotype in America that Asian Americans are much better at mathematics than the other ethnic groups, including Latinos. And now are these participants in this experiment reminded of their ethnicity. And then this happens. You see the males and the females among the Asian Americans, they can improve according to this stereotype their performances when they are reminded you are an Asian American. Now we look at the Latinos. If they are reminded before they take the test that they are Latinos, their performances are declining, they're suffering from this stereotype. This is the intersectional challenge. Individuals can be disadvantaged or be advantaged across multiple gaps by possessing multiple characteristics. And when we want also in the field of gifted education, honors education, deal with this phenomenon appropriately, we have to take this intersectional challenge into consideration. We want just to point to one other challenge, just to show you it's not so easy, it's a complex topic, equity gaps, and we call it the significance challenge. The term gap refers, as we already pointed out, to identifiable systematic differences in opportunities, the input, and the capacity to make use of opportunities, learning gaps, and in outcomes between groups. This was the achievement gap, and that which possess different characteristics, the groups, for example, different social classes, genders, ethnicities, religions, sexual orientations, whatever. But not all identifiable differences might be relevant. For example, if people from different countries dress differently, different clothes, this fact alone says not so much. It may simply be an expression of different preferences. Do we talk about a garment or clothing or dressing gap? But it can also be the result of a lack of access to functional clothing due to a lack of money. For example, criteria would have to be worked out as to which differences should be considered as significant. This means non-accidental, or the characteristic stimulates resentment. So we are convinced that gender gaps are relevant, clothing gaps or other gaps we might find are not so important, maybe. So we need also criteria for significance. To summarize, here our contribution is concerned with proposing an analytical perspective on equity gaps with the three fundamental gaps: achievement gap, opportunity gap, and the learning gap. And we think they provide a conceptual background for the analysis of commonalities as well as specifics between other gaps. So when we are talking about gaps, we should not only talk about the gender gap, we should always analyze then the achievement gap between the genders, opportunity gaps, and also the learning gaps. And you saw that proposing such gaps raises some conceptual problems, which we addressed in part in this contribution. Let's go to our more interactive part of this roundtable. We have prepared some questions. The overarching general question is, what are equity gaps in our field of honors education, talent development, gifted education? What causes equity gaps and what can we do about them? We have 4 specific questions. And you do not have to limit yourself in this discussion to these 4 specific questions. Maybe you are interested in other questions as well. Are local norms a way to eliminate equity gaps? I'm not sure if you are familiar with this term of local norms. It's intensely discussed over the last years. For example, this could mean that a certain percentage in each school would be enrolled in a gifted program. Let's say in each school, the best 5% in terms of achievement are enrolled in a giftedness program, regardless of whether the talent would have been sufficient according to national norms. So in one school with the same performances, you might be among the top 5%. In another school, you might not be among the top 5% with this performance. And let's say you are living in a disadvantaged area or in a privileged area, it can make a hell of a difference what are the others around you in order to give you access to such a program or not. Local norms are one way many colleagues are discussing to bridge gaps. Another question we could discuss, for example, how do we deal with when different resources led to different developmental outcomes. For example, if a twice exceptional child cannot reach the same level of achievement due to a disability. So they are at a disadvantage, maybe, but in a way, it's also very respectable what they can achieve. How do we deal with this? Or another question, are labels such as gifted or talented still appropriate, or do they actually contribute to widening equity gaps? And of course, also a last question, how should future research address equity gaps? When we submit our journal articles, we have, for example, to report on, let's say, how many boys, how many girls take part, gender proportions, but we do not have to address in a standardized way equity gaps, possible equity gaps in our sample. Nowadays, some American journals, in particular American journals, also asked us what was the ethnicity of your participants, because this might in part at least explain results. So how should we in future research address equity gaps in many ways? So, and I stop now for a moment the presentation and return to the audience, and let's discuss and start the discussion. And just to repeat this, I gave this presentation, but of course all my colleagues who are also present here are equally involved in the preparation of this presentation and in the discussion, and you can address any of us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. And Joke said already in the chat that different ways to contribute to the discussion. You can either raise hand and then you will be unmuted, or you can type your question in the chat. And now let's start. Which question shall we address first? Because it's quite different questions, of course.
Quite different questions. So here you can see the questions. Actually, I think it's not so important at the very beginning. Let's open the floor for all questions, and maybe we then go to specific questions. So if somebody has one remark, we are happy to discuss it.
Yeah, one thing that springs in mind is expectation. And in that respect, I'm thinking of Carol Dweck's research on fixed and growth mindset. And she did all kinds of experiments with different expectations. When teachers were expecting their pupils to have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset, it made quite a difference in their achievement. So that is maybe also already an interesting approach of overcoming gaps. I don't know how other people think about that, but
so I don't know who wants to answer. Qingqi, yes?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear
Yes.
me clearly? Yes, okay. To respond Albert's questions, okay, I like to say a few words. Yeah, as Albert just presented, that there are too many gaps in this that influence our students' achievement, whether during learning process or obtain educational resources. Thus, I think how to bridge the gaps or decrease or close the gaps is very important issue. Yeah, for specific question 1, are local norms a way to eliminate equity gaps? Yes, I think so. For some community or for some county in Taiwan, we really think a local norms is needed because we can find less gifted students selected from some county like Miaoli, like Yunlin, like Jiayi. Okay, this county, they more have less resources to cultivate the students. So we always found the number of gifted students are less than capitals. So local norms maybe.
So suppose, Qingqi,
Yeah.
suppose that we say, okay, 10% is above average. So
Yeah.
the school needs to fulfill 10% students with a label gifted. How do you reach that 10%?
Actually, in Taiwan, we set the standard as top 3%. It's very high percentage. So 10 or even 15%, I think is good for the local norms that
Yes.
students may not have so many resources. Yeah, and for question 2,
Maybe we can discuss first, Qingqi, maybe we can first discuss this question and stick to the local norms.
the local norm. Okay.
Yeah, so because in Germany, we have a different view. So in Germany, this would be really difficult. Let me explain why. So I'm living in a quarter, they call it the professor quarter. So the social economic status of the people living here in this quarter is very high. And they send their kids to the elementary school, and almost all of the kids go to the highest German achievement track. At school, we have a tracking system with different tracks. So if you cut here at 10% only, parents would complain here. On the other hand, in disadvantaged regions here, disadvantaged city quarters, also, of course, they need also help, and everybody is, I would say, relatively happy here, but they also think it's not just and not fair if local norms are applied. But many think this here. Or Michaela, am I right in my impression? Yeah, so this is the German situation. And now I'm interested in Taiwan. So people are accepting this, because I think local norms can really be a wonderful idea. So I absolutely agree with you, Qingqi, but it's not so easy to convince people of that here. So how did it work?
Yeah. Okay, Albert. Recently, the Ministry of Education just publicized a key point for discovering and nurturing trans-exceptional students. Yeah, the government support the program proposed from each city or county. We have 23 city and county in Taiwan. Yeah, and we discuss a lot about the standard to identify 2E students, because if we insist some high standard to identify students level as gifted students, then many of trans-exceptional students, they couldn't pass the rigid standard because of their disabilities. It's not mean they are not gifted or talented, but just their disability impact the performance in IQ test or even in academic aptitude test or other achievement test. So through the full discussion in our gifted community, it means I invited almost all the professors involved in gifted education to discuss about the question, shall we modify our standard for offering more opportunity for trans-exceptional students? I don't say decrease the standard, because actually the adjustment or the assessment procedure itself is not equal for the trans-exceptional students. So I say, should we modify the standard, or we modify the identification process to discover more 2E students? That's the concept, the same as the local norm concepts. Yeah. And I found most of our professors and teachers agree to modify such kind of standard or the process to identify 2E students. They agree it is more reasonable to find the students, but to find the talented students with disabilities. Yeah. So is this maybe some people we are against this kind of modified approaches, especially some professor from disability area. Actually, most of the gifted education professors, they agree such kind of modification, but some professor from disability areas, they just against the proposal because they don't want we label the disability student as gifted students. So it's a very key point that I think for the specification 3, if we don't label student as gifted student, we will not limited by IQ or some achievement test or aptitude test. Multiple talents, I think it's a better norms to level instead of gifted students. So I always agree that we use multiple talents, and it will widening the concept of talent development, and we can help more students. We can also close the gap of achievement. Yeah, that's my point. Yeah,
I think that's an interesting point, because we've heard that before in this conference, that the label giftedness or talented combined with a certain attributive like IQ or something is too limited to really how do you say, treasure the talents that are possible. And then for some people it would also always be a big barrier to say, okay, I'm talented, and other people would not feel themselves talented at all. But then when you widen the label, I think then it's more approachable for more people. So maybe that's really helpful. So I think I agree with you in that point.
Thank you.
And Ari, let me come back to your first one. So you mentioned TWEC.
Yeah.
I remember she published, I think in 2000 with Muller, 5 experiments or so about the labeling problem. So some of the students had received praise for intelligence and the others for their working style. And it was very harmful if they are labeled as intelligent, or we can also use other labels, and they were grouped into this. And this was also an idea by Anders Ericsson, by the late Anders Ericsson, who said we always looked at the term talents, that talents have something positive and enable you to do something. But his view, he said, you should not neglect the other perspective. If you don't have the talent, then you are limited and cannot reach this. And can you really, as a researcher, say you are not able to reach this because you are lacking the talent? So, so if I combine here TWEC, what she says about incremental view, modification view, or growth mindset, and what Anders Ericsson said, and maybe also the harm what can be done about the labeling things. So I would say also agree with Jingji or with you and Juan about using such labels. We can do without it. It was an everyday concept. And I think especially in the Netherlands and in Germany, we share also a very strange history when it comes to the terms giftedness and so on. So
yeah, and I like to tell the friends here that our Ministry of Education decided to support handicapped students who are not identified as gifted. If they have some special talents, even they are not reaching the standard as top 10 or top 15, our Ministry of Education like to support them to raise their achievement. That means to offer some enrichment opportunity. That means we'd like to discover more students through dynamic assessment or through enrichment program to develop their potential. So help them to perform, to help them to reach the optimal development. So that if you have some talents, we give you opportunity. You don't need to reach the high standard of gifted or even 15% of the norm. Yeah, I think it's better. It has some real meaning for helping students which can develop their potential. Developing students' potential, I think, is more important than just label them as gifted or talents. It's the really meaning of gifted education. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Albert, do you also follow the chat?
Yes, I just saw that. I'm really sorry if I mispronounce now the name, because I have a deficit here. Shioban Ni Donacha also wrote deficit.
Siobhan Donica, thank you so much.
Oh my, I'm really...
No worries, it's totally fine, no problem. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe you like to elaborate a little bit on this remark, what you mean with deficit approaches here?
Well, I think it's the, if you hold one thing up, the way that it tends to turn out is the other thing is either missing or not as good. So it's a deficit. It's a way of saying that really if we are saying one thing is the talent, by inference, we're really creating a deficit mindset, because then there's a comparative element that goes into that. And then, you know, we are really on that road to exclusion, and not how, because it's not that everybody will have the same affinities. It's not that everybody will have the same way of being. It's that we have to start to understand, in my mind anyway, the unique ways that people can express and be, you know, engaged with the thing that is an affinity for them, which has variability across human beings. So I think it's we reinforce what I would say is privilege. And it's very difficult when you keep reinforcing privilege to know what it's like when you have equality, because you have such a definite, you know, the quarters where, as you mentioned, where this happens, and then the people in that quarter may not want to know like you want to know, but other people may not want to know the same way. So I was just thinking about how we create those binary realities. So that's more of what I was thinking. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you very much for this contribution.
It's also something to do with fixed standards, what I hear you saying. There's one way of achieving, and that is the,
right. Exactly.
the way you can show yourself, but there's so many ways to show your possibilities or your interests.
And also just what, you know, what has happened to create a world in which certain things have preeminence, you know, and how is that a constructed reality? You know, how, because we accept things that in fact perhaps are constructions, are social constructions. So anyway, just to jump in there, R.A., on what you were saying.
Yeah, it was a very profound question, of course.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Peter, yes. With regard to question 3, we have honors programs at our university, Hansa University of Applied Sciences, and since 2010, and we have a discussion about excellence or talent, or how do you name your students. We decided to say, okay, our talent programs, our honors programs are for those students who want and can and dare do more. So it's not specific named excellence or talent, but it's also very related with ambitious. We started now in research into the accessibility of these programs. So are there obstacles for students to enter our honors programs, especially students first generation students, or also students with who are coming from lower socioeconomic classes? So it's really an issue here at our university, and I think it's also an issue in the Netherlands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to comment?
Yes, I want to comment.
Please. Yes.
Okay, please.
Peter, I really see your point. So on the one hand, so we know that our language creates problems to say it in a very neutral way, creates problems. But on the other hand, there's a need, of course, to talk about these students. So we cannot avoid it. So we need here a good solution. And in Germany, for example, we have a big program. The Ministry of Education launched this, and they call it students with special learning potentials. Another way to talk about it and to unify the language would be to speak about students with specific learning needs, maybe advanced learning needs, that the needs concept is the bridging concept across some achievement levels. We don't know what here the best is, and maybe some feel dispelled or discouraged to take part in your program if you use this term or another term. So I'm just telling you that I absolutely share your view here, and that we have to do some work in our field.
Okay. There's also a question here of Merzilla. Merzilla, do you want to ask your question? No, that's a little of a technical problem. Maybe move along. Okay. Albert, could you reflect some more on the term talent, Marker is asking.
Yeah, so, you know, I'm a researcher. Of course, we like to share our results with the public, and people in Germany, they use the term talent, so we also have to use it. So sometimes I simply use it as an everyday concept. There's an intuitive understanding of talent. So when we talk to parents in our counseling center, from a scientific point of view, let me first point out, we have problems as giftedness researchers, talent researchers, and so on, to publish in the best journals and use these terms and write so. It makes no sense. It was mentioned by Chioban, I hope I pronounce it now correctly. This binary dichotomies, talent, non-talent, and so on, makes no sense. There are so many facets in our mind. This is such a diversity in a mind. Or for example, if you look, let's say, about your talent or your IQ or so, how it moves across a day. At some points at the day when you feel very well, you have an IQ maybe of 145, and if you feel tired, you are below 100 or so. So the typical person has an IQ span on a day of 50. And if you just call them talented or not talented, we level all these differences, all this diversity, and we think simply that from a scientific point of view, the word talent is absolutely outdated. But of course, you still need to have a common basis to talk to lay persons, to parents, to teachers, and so on. And this is for me the only justification to use further on the terms like talent or giftedness. But if we use then these terms, then we have also to think very hard about the implications. For example, in Germany, we do not say giftedness, we always say high giftedness. So we use a hierarchy when we use this term. If you have more, you are better usually. Also, in many fields of education, we are doing it. We are talking about high school, like we're talking about higher classes, lower classes, and so on. We have these implicit hierarchies. So I think we should be very cautious. In science, we still need to use the term because we want to talk to people and they use these concepts, but we should be very cautious and should also make clear to the public the implications of it. And in the future, at least in science, in the best journals in the world, we have already almost abandoned these terms. So they are outdated in a way.
Yeah. As a chair, I have to mention the time. It is a little bit past the time that we have, but I don't know if we have a little extra. at least when I hear the discussion, I think there's also a very important role for both the teachers and the institutions to recognize these gaps and to not so much focus on trying to make quota, for example, of disabled or talented or whatever kind of category, but to know that these gaps are there and that we maybe are able to adjust our approach to students then when you're aware of these gaps, and that maybe some solution, or at least narrowing down the gap might occur also.
Yeah.
So maybe I will give you the last word, Albert, and thank you on forehand of your contribution.
Masa just wrote into the chat.
Oh, we can go on for 5 or 10 minutes. Okay.
Masa, which term would you like to use? So I spoke about the best journals. The best journals are maybe not the best journals, but I mean those with a very high impact factor. And with a very high impact factor, you use other qualitative terms, like when it comes to outcomes, when they are experts in a field or so, but not on the potential side. In the giftedness journals, the talent journals, you still can use the terms, but here the impact factors are not the best. So if we apply, for example, in Germany for research grants, they look for the impact factors of the journals. What I have published in the giftedness journals, this is not so accepted than in the other journals. And the other journals, yeah, you measure giftedness somehow as an input, as an independent variable, then you just tell how you used it. For example, if you measure it by IQ, you have an interval scaled variable, IQ. You just do not report dichotomized values. The same if you are going for achievements, for example, it's a continuous variable, and this is the way what you report in the best journals. Use your kind of assessment as a continuous variable, but not as a dichotomous variable when you distinguish between two groups. So this would be my answer here, Martha. But nice to meet you, and my compliments for the conference. Great idea.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, we exactly have the same problem in our group. So I do recognize this problem, and although talent, the term talent is in the scientific world outdated, I just did a request to change my the name, the Dutch name of my research group to Talent Development in Higher Education and Society, because what you said, I do recognize it in the Netherlands, but all over Europe. So honors is a term that's difficult to recognize, although maybe honors education, maybe it would be easier to embrace in a way, but talent is so well known and is sympathetic because it gives this idea of potential. However, when you want to publish, it's very difficult, especially because this continuum it's difficult to find empirical data. So, and you want to target also a specific group. So I think that in this high impact journals, our field is not really seen because of this problem. And for now, we didn't really find an answer except from taking just a small part of the research question and to submit that part to those kind of journals. But it's very difficult. And if I listen well to what you're saying, you see the same problem, but you also don't really see the way for a solution. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah, let's say this, you can also use the term, also in science, like talent development. But if it comes now that you use it as a label for a certain group in your research, those who have the talent and those who have not the talent, then you get the problems. This doesn't mean that you cannot use the word talent development. Just do not use this dichotomous view for the better journal. So this is my advice here. And yes,
Considering the
nowadays
time.
they use advanced learning, for example, or so.
Yeah. Considering the time, Vasily's question is here now, and she asked, is it possible to eliminate equity gaps? Perhaps we could decrease them. Are gaps inherent with diversity in the broad sense of the term? So diversity versus equity, I think.
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right, wonderful. Is my question clear about that? When I mean diversity, you had mentioned some identifiers such as race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, etc. They're human beings and everything on this planet or this universe is regarded as diverse. So is it possible to use the word eliminate? And I think that's what I was looking at specifically. Is it possible to completely eradicate equity gaps because of, or is the aim to perhaps decrease equity gaps, such as we're trying to decrease inequality with regards to socioeconomic status, for example.
Race diversity. Okay, Albert, the last word is yours.
Okay, my answer would be you should see this. A society consists of multiple subsystems. One subsystem is the economic subsystems. We have the political subsystem, and we have, of course, our educational subsystem. Each of the subsystems can contribute, but not a single subsystem can eliminate the equity gaps. So we cannot fix in education all the societal problems. But yes, we are also responsible for a part of it, and we should very clearly investigate where our responsibilities lie and what we can contribute to it. But I'm very clear about this. I think this is very obvious. It's a task, a big task for the whole society.
Thank you for mentioning Plucker's work, his study with Mind the Gap. Socioeconomic status, depending on what we're focusing on in education, tends to be a major issue. Some researchers might want to focus on race or language. However, socioeconomic status has continued to be a pressing issue in education. I'm speaking from the US perspective here.
I would like to thank everybody for their contribution, and of course, especially Albert and your group for the very intriguing questions. And yeah, we are not solving them, of course, but it's always good to point out the real problems that we have to face. So hopefully we will make steps now and in the future.